Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm pretty excited to present to you all today and have a discussion about that journey of starting a business and realizing that you have this entrepreneurial spirit to create these resources within your community. And I feel like that's something that's very crucial, and especially in today's economic landscapes, whether it be, within the state of New Mexico, within the Navajo Nation. It's important to do what you love and also make a resource that everybody else can connect to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to really share that journey and those experiences. So thank you all. My name is Zachariah Ben. I was born and raised in Shiprock, New Mexico. My Navajo clans are Yaidina and Neshle. Aze Tachini Bashichin, Kintachini Dashache, Ashe and Dashanala. My partner's name is Mary Ben, and we have a 2-year-old son. His name is Yabit Ben. So we farm out in near Shiprock. It's called Gadi, which is a farming community west of Shiprock along the San Juan River there. And so for us, we started Bidii Baby Foods LLC, which is registered domestically with the Navajo Nation, and also has a status as an agriculture cooperative. So that's who we are.
Thank you, Zach. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what is Bidii Baby Foods? And then also, how and why did you start your business in the first place?
Yeah, so Bidii Baby Foods was inspired by the pregnancy of our son, when we realized, like, oh, we're pregnant, and what are we going to do as producers to, in a way, make that his first food. And so with that, we realized that there is a huge gap in food insecurity. And we felt like in order to secure that type of food, rather than introducing processed and preserved foods to our son, and they are not also traditional foods. And so we decided to encode him with foods that we produce. And that starts on the farm. So foods that we produce on the farm, going through a manufacturing process, and then mill that down. So it goes through 2 layers of added value. And then from there, we are able to then create this dehydrated product where then we can serve that to our son. It's very similar to like a cream of wheat, like grits, but everything is traditionally done using our heritage seeds that we produce there. So out of that inspiration of wanting, the best for our son in terms of nutrition, we decided that, that was the route to go. And myself, I grew up farming all my life. I am a 6th generation farmer. My son is the 7th. And so all those years of passing down that ancestral knowledge of what it means to farm in this area, an area that is home, and using that foundation to be able to start intergenerational wealth, something that was severed, pre-contact. During contact with, the settlers, we felt like, we lost a lot of those opportunities. We lost a lot of those natural resources. And now we are moving out of that mindset. We are moving out of that survival mentality into thriving, using this business model, and to heal, most importantly, to heal by, cherishing those natural resources, preserving and protecting them by, using this business model, and most importantly, using those natural resources to feed our children. And so when our son tasted our corn there for the very first time, that's the type of reaction we wanted for not only our son, but for community, and to have a broadened scope, because this is something that we felt like was lacking all across the board in terms of nutrition. And so those were the needs that we identified and the resource that we created to address those needs and food insecurity for early childhood development. And we became one of the first ever traditional baby food lines across, the United States, across the northern and southern Americas here. And, and that's something that we felt was a major accomplishment. And so with that accomplishment, we wanted to continue to meet the demand by, increasing our supply. So that supply starts with, building up other producers in our area rather than individually, with that capitalistic mindset of saying, okay, this is Bidii Baby Foods on top of the pyramid, and this is how we are going to succeed. But no, that's something that I immediately want to, address by saying, here's our entrepreneurs, here's our future entrepreneurs, and here's our future growers. And we can train them to not only, develop a business and sustain it, but also develop a farmland and sustain that farmland in order to meet the food needs for our community.
I think one of the things that you talk a lot about is kind of how you're starting to build this economy on tribal land in Shiprock, and not that way you're starting to create this ecosystem so that the wealth stays in your community, and people can kind of buy and purchase things in Shiprock, not on the border towns. I'm just wondering if you can kind of talk more about that in regards to kind of how you got started and when you decided to officially incorporate and why, and if that kind of played a role in your decision to officially incorporate.
Yeah, I love that question because it really, determines in the beginning of our creation of like, okay, are we gonna do a business model? Are we gonna, stick to the same narrative of, using these crops as a cash crop and not, record any of that? And so we decided that, and this is something that, my generation, I feel, has a huge problem with is, the system, and how will that benefit us, or how is it keeping us adverse? How is that gentrifying us? And that goes with the reservation borders, that goes with, as Cecilia mentioned, the border towns, of understanding that once you cross that border from the Navajo Nation line into San Juan County, even though we are a part of San Juan County, when we pass that border, it's immediately different. The roads are better, the infrastructure is better, more resourceful, more abundant. And I felt like that was something that I grew up knowing that I wanted to change. So for me, I wanted to change that from the within. I wanted to be a part of it by adapting those types of conditions in order to learn how to thrive like my neighbors there. And I felt like that was something that has stuck with me for a very long time. And so in doing that, that's what really decided, are we going to stick to the same narrative and not collect or not establish any type of data? And I feel like data is something that, we don't have a baseline in, whether it be how much you yield, how much water are you using, how much land are you using, what does the soil health look like, how long have those seeds been in your lineage, and how long, who inherited it from where, to what type of revenue do you get, what does that profit look like, and where does the overhead costs go into, in terms of like operation and maintenance, admin. So we don't know any of that. And I felt like that was something that I really wanted to understand. And in order to understand that, you have to establish a bank account. You have to establish a status that will get you to understand what those resources, the output and the input look like, and how much of an impact that is having on your community and further. And so, with that type of data, you can do so much with that. You can apply for loans, you can apply for capital, you can establish business grants, you can have access to these resources that you are basically, when you level up, you are leveling up into, being able to have access to these resources. And I feel like, that was something that I yearned for. And that was something that was accomplished and through the business model that we established. And so that's what really pushed us into incorporating. And then it really was that, do we incorporate with the state of New Mexico as a New Mexico state business, or do we incorporate with the Navajo Nation? What are the benefits, if we incorporate with the state or Navajo Nation? So the benefits to that were, of course, taxes. How much are you paying back? And so for us, we get, I guess in a way for us, when we establish it with the Navajo Nation, they have food laws that are tax-free. And so when it's tax-free, we're not taxing our consumers. And so that was something that we immediately identified and wanted to partake in that type of, I guess, a benefit that will allow us to share this product without having to tax our people in that sense. People that sit in poverty, that people that, their living income is less than $10,000 a year. And I feel like, for 67% of the people, that's their annual living income. And I felt like, with those types of needs, we have to start small in order to grow that ecosystem that surrounds us there in the Navajo Nation. Because obviously, if you are starting a business in an impoverished community, in an adverse community, how are you going to sustain that business? And so that was something that we wanted to immediately address, was by our pricing, making it affordable, but not only that, but increasing the types of payment intakes that we can take. And that was well, of course, we take credit and debit, SNAP and WIC, EBT, and so that starts by establishing a farmers market there in the area. And so all of these things really came into, wow, you're not only building up your business, you're not only building up your resources that surround you immediately, but you're building your own ecosystem. And that was something that we felt like, okay, in order to do this, we cannot use all of our revenue because we barely break even. On our first year, we made around 20,000, 40,000, but the investment was 20,000. So you're just breaking even. And so with that, we started this 2-arm system, a nonprofit, a 501c3, and we created the Ben Initiative. And so with this, it allows us to apply for grants. It allows us to create programs, farmer and training programs, and education and awareness in terms of nutrition that we create on our farms, to then share those programming out. So with that, you're building up the awareness of like, okay, this is Bidii Baby Foods, this is the type of food that they make, and this is how it will benefit me and my family nutritionally. So with that, you get orders. And so that's how the 501c3 complements the LLC. And with that, we easily went from, that that was our first year, was 2021. Our second year was 120,000 gross, and that was something that was, we realized that this 2-arm approach is not only beneficial for us, but it's mutually beneficial, because not only are we building up our business, but we're building up our ecosystem there to sustain this type of business. And when we have that sustainability for ourselves as Bidii Baby Foods, then now becoming a tribal liaison, it allows us to build up future entrepreneurs. And with that, they don't have to worry about sustainability, because we've already created those programming and projects to create that awareness and that education. And that's how it will mutually benefit our future entrepreneurs and future producers here that are now taking that same course of incorporating themselves and their farms.
So you talk a lot about like sustainability and then the process that you went through to officially incorporate. I know in the work that we do with the New Mexico Tribal Entrepreneurship Enhancement Program, a lot of times we talk to people and they are sole proprietors, so they're not incorporated. There's a lot of hesitancy to do that. on Indian country, there's a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, but they aren't officially incorporated. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak to that in your experience, why you think there might be some hesitancy to incorporate, if it's because there might be barriers to entry, like what do you see in your community that might be preventing people from kind of taking that next step?
Yeah. So for me, one major thing that I realized was dependency on the government. And that's something that I felt like, that's historical trauma taking place, and that's something that we felt like as Bidii Baby Foods, we need to work out of that. We need to move out of that in order to create other entrepreneurs in our area with ourselves. And so with that, I felt like, a lot of the times with that type of trauma, that dependency, you become comfortable with what you already are used to, those processes. So those processes are there, but they're not recorded. And so some farmers, I had questions from some farmers that were stating that they wanted to, add income into as a sole proprietor, but they sold this like $2,000 plus in produce that they produce, but they how can they put that into their taxes? And so, I said, well, you could do it this way, but that's just really, that's taking a lot of shortcut. You're not really understanding the impact that you can have when you do establish a business. And so, there came like tax questions like that to financial illiteracy of like, okay, I don't understand how to do taxes first off. So with that, I'm just used to getting a 8 to 5 job, getting a W-2, and filing those at the end of the year. And I felt like, as a business owner now, like I have to pay back taxes, and growing up, we always got money back from taxes. And that was because of the dependence that my parents had, and they cashed in on that. And so again, that's what people are comfortable. That's what people know. And when you live in an impoverished mindset, then that's something that you are comfortable with. You're comfortable with getting money back at the end of the tax season because you have children, or you work in 8 to 5. But when you go from that to owning a business, and now you have to, you're contracting yourself out, then you have to pay back those taxes. And that's where you can either go into debt, or you can pay that off over the year, or pay back in total because you've saved, and planning for that type of payback for the taxes. So all of these things come into play, and you can already immediately tell like that is overwhelming information just simply talking about taxes, and that becomes an insecurity of like, I don't want to do that. Like, so that's something major there, is that financial illiteracy, to also understanding like, okay, if I start a business, I am going to need farm laborers. And so with farm laborers, do I hire them on as an employee, or do I hire them on as a contractor? What does that look like? Do I file a W-2? Do I file a 1099? And so for a lot of these people, it's hard to understand, and how much to pay them legally. And those things really come into play. Like, what if I pay for gas and food off the clock? Do I pay that out of my personal account? Do I pay that with the business account? All of these things come into play. And I feel like it's hard for a lot of people to navigate a lot of that in the beginning years and that in the first year of business. But teaching them that we do have resources immediately out there. A lot of software that can come into play, like QuickBooks is a huge one for us. Square is a huge one for us. Being able to have those point of sales, if you're at a farmer's market, teaching them that, if you do take in cash, you have to deposit that, and this is how you would mark that down. A lot of hand-holding is something that, we've identified is, needed. And being able to, and realizing too that, as indigenous people, we're very interactive learners. We were orally taught, we were visually taught a lot of like and that's how our culture is. And so when you go from that to like, okay, here's a presentation, for 1 hour, you have to pull this much information out, and you realize like you're behind on taking notes, and then you're not good at taking notes, and then all of it just kind of breezes by, and you're like, there's so much information. How do I dissect that now? So, a lot of these identifying a lot of these, I guess, challenges for these future entrepreneurs, I felt like, we have to really tailor a lot of these programs to meet the needs of our people and how they learn. So those are just some of the challenges. Yeah, so I'll cut it short there. And, I think that's something that is one of the more huge cases that we've identified in terms of like, okay, this is, if I want to start something, this is, what it will take. And this is something that is hindering me from moving forward.
I think just listening to you talk about some of the barriers and reasons for people not wanting to incorporate, I think there's also sometimes an attitude of like, I'm not going to be able to start a business on the reservation. Like, you have to move to the city to be successful, but I see you, and then I see Angelo, both of you who have started businesses on your tribal land and are doing it. You're being very successful, you're growing, so it can be done. And I also think encouraging more of that activity will lead, it has potential to lead to like true sovereignty for the various tribal nations. And I see on this call, like, I know Hillary from New Mexico Community Capitals on here, Rachel from AIBE, from NMSU. They're all resource providers as well. They have really awesome programs for Native American entrepreneurs. And I guess I just wanted to ask, because we have our programs and then we have all these programs in New Mexico, what could we be doing better to kind of make things either more accessible or kind of just continue to support entrepreneurs on tribal land?
Yeah, that's actually a tricky one, because when you think of sovereignty, you think of greatness in terms of like how much our government is managing all of these resources around us. But really, it feels like, first off, that we're set up to fail, and that's something that we're doing really well now. And so with that, I feel like even with the new leadership in terms of the administration for Navajo Nation presidency and vice presidency, like, their focus right now is tourism. So a lot of the resources are heading into guiding, trail guides for Antelope Canyon, Grand Canyon, Page. So, what can we do to then move into the area as an agriculture producer? Agritourism, that's something that, a lot of people look over. So, resources in that is, I guess, it's really hard to navigate because you look at jurisdictional issues, and that's something that we're facing right now. Like, for example, I think this is a really good example, is we're getting our manufacturer's permit in order to produce our food. And so we're on the very last leg of that through the state, not through the Navajo Nation, because the Navajo Nation does not have food safety policies to say, okay, here's your manufacturer's permit issued by Navajo Nation. And the reason for that is there's not a lot of oversight. Even if there is oversight, there is no enforcement of those rules, regulations, and bylaws and laws that are in place to protect such businesses such as ourselves. So what are we doing to actively create that type of change, in terms of policy. So right now, I think my biggest ask is like creating templates off of the data that we currently have that will allow future producers or future entrepreneurs, future business owners to help navigate through that process, whether it be with the state, whether it be with the Navajo Nation, or both. And being able to use these templates to then use that as a key to, okay, this is easy to navigate for me as Mr. Ben here, of what it takes to get certified as an agriculture producer, that I can do farm to school initiatives, what types of programs are available for me to do that, so I can invoice school districts and health institutions and early childhood institutions and providers. I want to do that. And so for us, we needed to get a manufacturing permit. We went, of course, to the Navajo Nation, no resource whatsoever of like, okay, the only resource that we have access to is the food handlers program, where if you're going to go set up at the farmer's market or the flea market to sell stew, fresh food in that way, make for fry bread and a bowl of stew, then you get a food permit for that. But nothing higher up in terms of like, if I'm going to open up a restaurant, who is my oversight in terms of food handling and those safety measures. So the reason why I use that example so much is because that is a good example of like how much of a, I guess, a gap that tribal sovereignty has. We have the ability to create these policies, we have the ability to have these laws in place, but we don't enact on it. And because of that, it keeps our people at bay. It keeps us adverse, from being able to be fruitful, to be able to have access, readily available, accessible. Example, community kitchen. We don't have a public community kitchen on the reservation. All hundreds and thousands of acres, not one single public community kitchen, commercial kitchen, excuse me, a commercial kitchen that is certified by whether it be the state or the Navajo Nation for us agriculture producers to go in there and manufacture our products. We have no butchery on the Navajo Nation for livestock, and if we want to sell that from farm to school initiatives, we have no types of certification or facility to accommodate that. And we have to go off reservation. We have to rely, again, depend on the infrastructure of the border towns who collect taxes off of our communities, who get our monthly checks as a tribal community. And we're investing into Sam Walton, and we're not investing into Bidii Baby Foods. And that's the reason why, is because it's so much of a economic desert. And so for us, we feel like that's something that we need more of, is those templates to show others of how to prosper rather than having to survive.
Awesome. So, and I know you and I are kind of starting to work on some of those templates and pathways, kind of based on your experiences opening your business. I'm wondering if you can kind of just talk about that process and what it was like going through all of the different steps that you had to go through in order to like properly register your business, not just with the state, but with the Navajo Nation, because I know that that was a long process and there was a lot of different things and hoops that you had to jump through and get through to get officially incorporated. So can you kind of just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so for us, we, as Navajo Nation, we're unique because we have our own business development office. I think we're the only ones in the state that have in terms of tribal government, that have their own business development office. And so, with that benefit, we felt like, that was something that we wanted to, in the future, if we wanted to pay taxes, we wanted it going back into our community. We wanted to going back into the nation. And so that was one of the major ways of moving us into like, okay, we're going to become incorporated with the Navajo Nation Business Development Office there in Window Rock, Arizona. So what we did was we have to, of course, get our EIN. And then from there, we have to get our articles of incorporation, submit our business plan. And then from there, understand like, where do we fall under what type of business model? Is it agriculture? They didn't really have a definition for us because we were touching on a lot of things. We're not only, I think that's what made us unique as well too, is because we are, we don't source our food from other producers and then create the product. We source it ourselves. And that's what makes us unique in a lot of ways, is that, we plant our own crops, we add the value, we go through the manufacturing process, and then we, send that off to our consumers. So, that was unique for them as well. And, usually it's just a company that would start up and then procure from local producers, and then, they already have the manufacturing process, and then they ship it off to the consumers. So, we had to navigate that, which was a little challenge. And it took over I'd say a good, not over a year, but just within a year of, from start to finish, from when we first submitted our EIN to now, getting our registered business there, stamp of approval from Navajo Nation. And so that was a very lengthy process, and it was lengthy because a lot of the focus during that time was, of course, healing from COVID, moving out of COVID. And then, which is just a year later, and that's when we started our process. So a lot of the focus was on, moving infrastructure, moving resources to accommodate our sick people. And then from there, the offices were not open, so we couldn't just show up in person. So a lot of the communication was via email and phone calls. And majority of the time, the people that we called were not in. The phones became disconnected, straight to voicemail. And so it just took a lot of pushing from our end. And, it was a very lengthy process, and very challenging, because sometimes the people that you do talk to that are in those positions are incompetent, or do not even own their own businesses. And so with that, they may have the credentials in terms of academia, but that is academia that they was taught to them in ways of how to manage a Western business off reservation. And so that's where, there's immediately like, okay, you have to comprehend that this is a Navajo Nation business on the Navajo Nation, and these are our needs. Where do we get a manufacturing permit? Where do we file our taxes with which department? And what do we tax on? Do we tax ourselves? Do we tax our product? All of these questions really immediately became into play. And our land that we use is leased land. It's a land use permit that's issued by the Navajo Nation, that's issued by the federal government. So the land that we reside on, we do not own. And so we cannot use that as an asset. We cannot use that as a business development site. So, we cannot build permanent infrastructure on these areas. Like if we need food storage, if we need a processing plant. And so that's a really good question from Rachel. I just saw like, how long do these leases last? They last indefinitely until the person that has, like, let's say I have 20 acres of agricultural land, and I don't farm it. So technically, if I don't farm it for 4 years plus, I have to relinquish it back to the Navajo Nation, and then they put it into a lottery for future LUP holders to that submit, like, okay, here's my crop management plan, here's my risk assessment, here's my assets in terms of like, here's my heavy equipment, the tools that I have, the knowledge that I have, and submit that in a document to the farm board, where the farm board that will then issue those the farmland based off of the the crop management plan that they submit. And so that's technically how it's supposed to go. But now you have farmers in the area, and I think around 60% of them are over 60 years old. And you have another 20% that are the other 40% of that are like 30 and over. But you don't have you probably like have like 1%, 2% of like 20-year-olds. And even then they're not incorporated. So, all of these types of issues really come into play, with tribal governments. There's so much red tape, so much bureaucracy. And so it took a lot of navigation, a lot of understanding of like, we do have the process of traditional farming. We can farm very well. But putting that onto paper and submitting it to Navajo Nation takes, pushing from our end to them. And so I think we could talk about that all day. And, and that's why I say, templates are important, because with those templates, we're building up future entrepreneurs. And with those future entrepreneurs, you create this cohort that will then go up to this Navajo Nation government level, tribal government level, even state level, to address these types of policies and how we need to amend them into our benefit in order to sustain those types of businesses.
What would you say is like one thing that kind of helped you navigate that process and get through it? Was there any type of resource that you used, or a mentor, or like how were you? Because you really truly are a trailblazer. Doing what you're doing. So how did you navigate all of that?
Yeah, we navigated that on our own. Truly. And we navigated it to also know that it's not what you know, it's who you know. For tribal government. And I think this can be talk to the same in terms of like smaller communities and smaller governmental structures of like, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Honestly, probably Mexico as a whole is like that.
Right. I think for rural communities, like it's really, really that comes into play. So that was something that we wanted to change in a way. And that's why, we need competent people in those positions, and that's reality. And competent people to be in those positions that understand, okay, this is what it takes to develop and sustain a business on the reservation. So with us, like, I knew the director of the business development office. And so with that, like, I had his personal number. I could, call him and say, this is what we're working on. What do we need to do next? And so he gave me the play-by-play of what to do next in terms of, developing the business. And if it weren't for that, then it would have been more lengthier. We'd probably still be, pushing Navajo Nation right now to be like, okay, what's our next move? What are your policies and what do they say, compared to New Mexico? And so I think that's something that really comes into play here as well. And that's where I say, bureaucracy comes into play. So, being able to navigate that is just, either find somebody that you do know that has a successful business on the reservation, or start networking to create those types of networks and relationships. And that's what I mean, being able to build your own ecosystem. And so hopefully now, and that's, speaking in terms of like others that are outside the Navajo Nation, but right now we as Bidii Baby Foods, now that we're trailblazing, we're not doing that for an individual gain. We're doing that for others to follow us up that trail. And so, that's where the Tribal Liaison position comes in, because it allows us to develop future entrepreneurs here pretty soon. And so my goal was to incorporate 4 other producers from the agriculture sector, and to incorporating their own business, having an EIN, and to have a status that says, okay, I can invoice using Yazzie Farms, and being able to be a part of the farm to school initiatives that the state is currently so resourceful in. They just passed I think it's Senate Bill 4, which allows for universal foods. And so with that universal foods, rather than outsourcing that type of food, they're insourcing. And so that is a major, our next season is taken care of, because the state is able to procure from us and immediately distribute that to our youth that are in the school districts, to our elders that are in senior care centers. So, those are the types of resources that we need. They're being created. So what are we doing now to, meet the demand? And so that's why I kind of, really touched on that in the earlier conversation. And so hopefully, now as Bidii Baby Foods, as we, continue to trailblaze that, with the liaison program, we'll be able to create our own template and be able to, share that with others here in the near future.
So I have one more question, and then I'll read questions in the chat and open it up to others. But just coming from all of that, like starting your business, going through the whole process of incorporation, and now you have your 501c3 and your LLC, and you really are, you guys are in it, you're growing, you're just doing awesome work. Even though it was hard kind of starting, what are now kind of some of the fruits that you see for yourselves and for Bidii Baby Foods, but then also looking forward, like what are the fruits that you can see for your community and that can come from entrepreneurship and more people starting businesses and growing your own business?
Yeah, so for me and us, for the future, our 5-year vision is, of course, to establish those types of facilities that will accommodate future producers in our area, whether it be a butchery to, a commercial kitchen setting, and, have more producers in our area create that ecosystem. So right now we're still in the beginning stages as we're heading into our 2nd year of doing business as Bidii Baby Foods, that we have all those types of programming, the educational programmings, the farmer enhancement programs, being able to scale down our acreage in order to accommodate future entrepreneurs to then use a couple acres and then build their own produce and have that idea of what it takes to create a crop management plan and start planning overall. And so we envision a green future, and green not in terms of money, but in terms of agriculture and using the natural resources now that we currently have. And so I say this too because I think the tribal entrepreneurship program really was also another focus of what is your community doing to move out of extractive industries? For us in San Juan County in the Northwest region, we're so used to extractive industries. That was our, how our families were able to sustain themselves, that by taking a job at the San Juan generating power plant, or, working in the coal mines, to, moving into the oil and gas fields. And moving out of that now, as it starts to dwindle, that type of industry starts to dwindle. Now, what do we have access to? Now that all of those, the past couple of generations, that was their main source of income and sustainability, was the extractive industries. Now moving into where, farming is just second nature in terms of it's a hobby, I'm going to plant for my family rather than my community. And so that was another identification, was we are truly the only ones on the Navajo Nation as Bidii Baby Foods that is using the farm as a livelihood, as a sole livelihood. And, we don't have a 9-to-5 job on the side of this. This is not a secondhand venture for us. This is, totally 100% our thing. And we're, moving with that. And when you talk to other producers in the area, even the major ones, like off season, what are they doing? They have a 9-to-5 job. They got another skill that they're using to provide income. For us, our whole off season was, either grants or our revenue. And so, that was something that we've identified and also wanted to bring to the table and build these resources up, build the ecosystem up, so that way it creates on its own naturally more opportunities for our communities to thrive in. And that is something in long term is something that we want for all of our communities that surround us there. So yeah, thank you.
All right. So there's a few questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask them yourselves, or I can just read them. It's up to, I'll read Stacy's. So several years ago, one of his entrepreneurial students at Anderson School of Management wanted to start a business selling Navajo tea, but she was concerned about using the name Navajo in her product brand messages, since we thought the name Navajo is trademarked. If he encounters that question again, is there an office in the tribal government he should contact?
And I think that's something that we lack, is we don't have our own trademarking office here in the Navajo Nation. So your best bet is to talk to the Navajo Nation Business Development Office in Window Rock. But that's something that we also ran into, not as a challenge or a barrier. It was just like, if we do use a Navajo name, or like, what does that look like, and get that trademarked. So, Bidii Baby Foods is trademarked under the US registry. So, moving forward, like if anybody else, creates Bidii Baby Foods, then, or Bidii Baby or Bidii Foods, like, then we can, take them to court. But Navajo, to my understanding, is not trademarked. And I say not trademark, like if, for example, if you were to use it and the tribal government takes you to court, it's not, there's no case there, because it's a definition, like it's a word, an overall word. So I think even for you guys cannot trademark it. And then, because I think that's where I forget what it's called, but it's placed under its own category of like, you can use it, but it's like everybody else can use it as well. Everybody has access to that type of word, I guess. Because I remember in Navajo Nation taking this mutual aid relief group to court, because their title was Navajo Hopi COVID relief efforts or group. And so with that, like, what got the attention was that they were getting a lot of donations in, and by the millions. And so Navajo Nation also set up their own mutual aid fund for people to donate to during COVID. And so people on the outside of that did not know who to, differentiate. Is this the tribal government, or is this the mutual aid group? But I want to donate to the mutual aid group. Or you have another person like, I want to specifically donate to the Navajo tribal government, because I know they'll manage the funds better. That question came into play. So of course, Navajo Nation was like, we need to differentiate that. So with that, we claimed the Navajo, trademark. But I think it Navajo Hopi tribal, or the Navajo Hopi Relief Mutual Aid Group, is still in operation now. And so because of that, I think you probably do more research on that, but like, that from my understanding is, I think Navajo Nation government lost that suit because of the, it's just an overall word that people can use. So that, or you can use Dene. Dene is also another word for Navajo. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Very helpful.
The next question is from Elaine. Do you want to ask yourself?
Yes, I just want to say, Zach, such a heartfelt thank you. This has been so inspiring, the persistence that you and your wife have demonstrated. makes me want to be more persistent in my day. I'm very grateful. I'd love to come to your area and meet you in person. I am the board chair of the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity. We've been working now for about a decade to bring public banking to New Mexico. And the short version of that, if it's unfamiliar to you and the others on the call, is that it would be an institution to bring more of our New Mexico public dollars back to our state to use to invest in our residents, in particular entrepreneurs in rural communities. So I am curious about, and by the way, the template that you're working to create just sounds like such an incredible way to support a future ecosystem that is different from what has been known. I'm curious, if we had a public bank at this time, how would you best use public dollars to help overcome some of the barriers that you've described and help to move along this dream that you're acting on in bigger, giant steps, maybe not so hard?
Yeah. So then that, I think that for me is another fight. In terms of like dealing with the nonprofit world, for example, all these years we've relied on nonprofits in the border towns, because of course they have the structure, they have the admin power, and they're registered with the state. Their statuses are with the state. So with that, people want to invest into them, knowing that they border these impoverished, adverse communities. So with that, they were collecting data. And so all of this extracted data goes into the border town nonprofit, where they get to sell that data, get funding, but when it comes back to the nonprofit and is funneled back to us, we only ever see, honestly, 30% back into our communities. And you're probably wondering where the other 70% is. It goes to the board. It supplies their 6 figures. And that in itself is an industry that has no type of oversight or enforcement. And so that's why Navajo Nation, in terms of data, is very dark. It's just like there's no data here, because we understood that for a while now. And so with that, we created the 501c3 in order to immediately apply for those grants. And where our status with the 501c3 is through the state. And so with that, we immediately are able to get these grants. And with these grants, we're getting that using the data off of our business, off of our infrastructure that we currently have in our community that we reside in. And with that, it's that funding is immediately implemented into the community, by the community, for the community, rather than, this is the Ben initiative, and we're going to use it to research. That's another thing, is that there's so many researchers in our area, but there's no actual solution makers. And so for us, we're solution makers. And so with that, immediately, like I said before, it was we need facilities. We need facilities to help these future producers and entrepreneurs here in the near future meet the demand, to supply Navajo Nation, to supply New Mexico State, and those food to farm to table types of initiatives. And so we're working on our end, and that's something that I feel like would be a very huge investment, especially for public dollars, to be allocated to those types of projects, in terms of the food.
Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to say, Zach, I love always having conversations with you, not just right now, but during our weekly meetings, because you really are a trailblazer, and like Elaine said, very, very inspirational. And I really hope that with our continued work through the Tribal Entrepreneurship Program, that we can help other people pave the same path or go down the same path that you've paved for your community. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. We still have, I guess, 1 more minute. If anyone else wants to unmute, feel free. But if not, I think that'll be the end of today's fireside chat. I hope all of you who joined us learned. I always learn from Zach, and just really appreciate your time and your insight and all the work that you're doing, not just for our program, but for New Mexico, and tribal entrepreneurs in general. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody else, for attending, and always happy to share, always happy to share. So if you have any other future questions or, comments like, Stacy's of like, what does it look like to, just trademark this and that, or, similar questions. And, I think, I'd definitely be happy to answer or, have a discussion about certain issues and, again, create solutions for our communities, especially for the state. So, very happy to do that.